This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, so today onwards we'll start with the development part. Okay, so to begin with, we'll be starting with what native HANA development, where we are responsible for designing the HANA database. Okay, so as part of this native HANA development, as part of this native HANA development, we are going to what? We are going to create what database objects. Okay, we are going to create the database objects. So we have different types of what database objects. Just like if you take our abap context, we have repository objects and what dictionary objects, nothing but database objects. If you take repository objects, we have executable programs, include programs, module pool programs, subroutine pool, all those things we call it as what repository objects. And coming to dictionary objects, we have tables, views, data elements, domains, type groups, search helps, lock objects, structures, all those things we call it as what dictionary object. Similarly, as part of this HANA database also, we'll be creating what different database objects, and those database objects will consume in our reporting. Okay, so to begin with, we'll focus on what creating the database objects. Okay, so for doing this native HANA development, so in the last class, if you have seen this, let me open that slide. Yeah, so what we will be doing for designing this database objects, from the HANA Studio, we'll be connecting to what HANA database. So if you take our abap context, if you want to create any dictionary object, suppose if you want to create a table, we don't have the provision to directly connect to what database. We'll do it only through what application server. Means from SC11 only, we'll be creating the dictionary objects. We cannot connect directly to the database. Whenever we click on the logon pad, what are the credentials we are going to give, that is going to be connected to what application server. Through that application server only, we are going to create the dictionary objects. But whereas here, from the HANA Studio, we'll be directly connecting to what HANA database. So what is this HANA Studio? HANA Studio, it is a tool. Okay, HANA Studio is a tool used for what? Connecting to what HANA database and developing the objects related to what HANA database. Am I clear? So HANA Studio is basically a software. It's a tool through which we'll connect to what HANA database and develop the objects related to what HANA database. So this tool is basically what Eclipse based tool. So if you know UI5, for doing the UI5 development, we use what Eclipse. Similarly, this HANA Studio is also basically what Eclipse based tool only, but inside that Eclipse tool, they'll install some HANA related plugins and they rename it as, then SAP renamed it as what HANA Studio. So basically HANA Studio is a Eclipse based tool. What SAP has done is, in that particular Eclipse tool, they have installed some HANA related plugins and SAP has renamed it as what HANA Studio. Okay, so first we'll try to open this HANA Studio. Let me connect to the server. Yeah, right, so this is my desktop. So here you can see we have this SAP HANA Studio. So as I told you in the initial session, when you take the rental system, in that rental system, you'll have this particular HANA Studio. Okay, so let me open this HANA Studio. I'll double click on this. So it is basically what? An Eclipse based tool. One second, please. Yeah. Okay, so here if you observe this, once you open the HANA Studio, this HANA Studio will be associated with what? Different perspectives. Okay, different perspectives, and these perspectives we use. What is the meaning of perspective? Look and feel. Each perspective will have what? Its own look and feel. So this HANA Studio will have different perspective. Okay, and these perspectives are used for developing the applications related to a different languages. So in HANA development also, SAP has provided a different perspective. Okay, each perspective will have its own design view, means will have its own look and feel. Okay, some of the important perspective that we use for HANA development is, we have development perspective. Okay, so as part of this HANA Studio, you'll have many perspective. Not all the perspectives are related to HANA. If you want to develop the Java application, you'll have different perspective. If you want to develop a VC++ code, I'll have different perspective. If you want to develop a Java Bean EJB, you'll have different perspective. So related to HANA also, we have different types of perspective, like what? HANA development perspective. Okay, then we have what? Something called as modular perspective. Okay, then we have abap perspective. Then another important one is what? Debugger perspective. So as a abap HANA consultant, we'll be using this particular 4 perspectives: development perspective, modular perspective, and what? Abap perspective, and then debugger perspective. So if you take this development perspective, it is used for what? Native HANA development. Means it is used for designing the HANA database. Means we are going to create all the HANA database objects as part of this particular development perspective. Then in this modular perspective, we use this perspective for development of what? Modeling objects. So during the course, we will be seeing how to develop something called as what? Attribute view, analytical view, and what? Calculation view. So for developing those modeling objects, we use what? Modular perspective. And then we have what? ABAP perspective. It is used for developing what? ABAP repository objects. ABAP repository object means, I believe in the last class, I just developed one simple code to show you the difference between data to code and what? Code to data. So if you take a normal ABAP context, how do you develop an executable program? We'll log on to the application server through the GUI, and we'll provide the credentials, and we'll log on to the system, and we'll open that particular ABAP editor. So what I can say is, instead of connecting to the application server through what? The GUI, through the SAP GUI, we can connect to that particular application server through this HANA Studio also. So I can say that this ABAP perspective we can use for developing what? ABAP repository objects. And also there are some objects related to HANA database like CDS views and what? AMDP. So just to summarize, if you take this particular what? HANA development perspective, this is basically used for what? Native HANA development. Native HANA development. So in this, we are going to what? Create what? We are going to create the database objects. Okay, what are those database objects? We'll see. And this modular perspective, we use it for what? Development of what? Development of something called as what? Modeling objects. Development of modeling objects. Like there is something called as attribute view. Okay, and analytical view. Analytical view, and we have something called as what? Calculation view. So to develop these objects, we use what? This modular perspective. One second, I'm recording this session. Yeah, okay. So calculation view. Then coming to this particular ABAP perspective, we can use for what? Developing what? Developing what? ABAP repository objects. If you want to create a global class, if you want to create an executable program, we can, means that abap editor. Whatever we do in abap editor, like we use that abap editor for developing what? Executable programs, include programs, subroutine pool. Okay, we can develop those kind of objects. So developing abap repository objects and what? There is something called as CDS views. So to develop the CDS views and to develop something called as AMDPs, abap managed database procedures. We use this particular abap perspective and develop a debugger perspective. What is the purpose of this? It is used for what? Debugging. Okay, so we as an abap consultant, we know how to work with the debugging. Here also in hana database also we can debug. So used for what? Debugging something called as what? Stored procedures, not only stored procedures and other blocks I can say. Okay, anything which exists in the form of statements, we call it as what? Block. So as an abap hana consultant, overall we will be using these particular 4 types of what? Perspectives. Okay, so first we'll focus on what? Native hana development. Native hana development, where we are going to create what? Database objects. Okay, so you will have many database objects. We'll have many database objects. We have something called as schema. Okay, we have something called as tables. Okay, then we have something called as database views. Then we have something called as synonyms. Okay, then we have something sequences. Okay, then we have something called as indexes. Then what else? Triggers. What else? Column views. And then what else? Procedures. Okay, then we have something called as functions. Like this, there's something called as EPM models. So like this, we will be creating what? Database objects. So initially, our focus is on what? How to create all these particular database objects. Where exactly we use this, we'll understand only when you go to what? Developing what? Reports. Understood? So initially, we are going to design the database. Okay. So to begin with, we'll see what is the meaning of a schema. Okay. Or before that, for creating and managing these database objects, we require what? SQL console. So those who know Oracle database, we have SQL prompt. Here also we have something called a SQL console. We can use that SQL console for creating and managing what? The database object. So first, I already opened the hana studio. Okay, so what is my agenda here? I want to do the development of what? Database objects. So what is the perspective we require? Development perspective. Okay, in this development perspective only we are going to create the database objects. By default, it has opened what? What perspective it has opened? Development perspective. So what is a perspective? A perspective is a design view. Means each perspective will have what? Own look and feel. It is a layout editor where we can do the development. Okay, so by default it has opened the development perspective. We can switch between different perspectives. How do we switch? On the application toolbar right hand corner, you can see where I am moving the mouse pointer. We have different types of perspective here: modular perspective, development perspective, abap perspective, debugging perspective. Like this, we have different perspectives. So I can click on these buttons to switch between the perspectives. Otherwise also, somewhere here, you can see in the window menu. In the window menu, we have what? Perspective and what? Open perspective. Understood? Perspective, open perspective. If you click on this, you'll have what? Different types of what? Perspectives. If you click on other, all these are what? Different perspectives. Understood? So what you have to understand is this hana studio is basically an Eclipse. Basically an Eclipse tool only. But in that Eclipse tool, what the administrator will install what? hana related plugins, and they renamed it as what? hana studio. So since Eclipse, we can use the Eclipse tool for developing different types of what? Applications. I can develop the JavaScript code, Java code. Okay, like this, we have different types of applications we can develop through this particular what? Eclipse tool. So here we can switch the perspectives. I can choose abap perspective, debug perspective, development perspective, like that. Okay, so anyhow by default it is what? Development perspective. We have 3 tabs here: Project Explorer, Okay, again at this stage we are not in position to understand this. Project Explorer, repositories, and what? Something called as what? Systems. Okay. So let us be in systems tab only. So what is my agenda here? I want to design the HANA database. I want to create the HANA database objects. Okay, so what I need to do? I need to connect to what? HANA database. How do you connect? You can see here. By default, you'll have the instance here. Just like if you open the logon pad, on the logon pad you'll have the system now. So just you'll choose a system and click on logon. Here also we have the instance of my HANA database. Let me right click on this. I'm trying to connect to what? HANA database. So I'll right click on this. So who will create this system means we are not bothered about that. It is the job of what? Administrator. Okay, you will create this particular instance. Just in the real time also, whenever you are doing the native HANA development, just in the system, the development perspective, in the systems tab, try to right click on the instance. I'll right click and I'll say what? Log on. I'll click on log on. It is asking me the credentials. So what is the database user here? HANA is a database user. Here in my context, it is what? HANA database user password. What is the password here? I'll just give the password here. Yes, okay. So it is connected. It is connected. Okay. Now you can see here we have different folders here. As a HANA developer, abap HANA consultant, we'll be using what? Catalog and what? Content. So the other things are not relevant for the development. They are related to what? Administration. Okay, so we are not bothered about that. So if you have catalog, content, and provisioning and what? Security. Initially we'll be dealing with what? Catalog. Okay, so this catalog folder will represent what? All the SAP HANA dictionary objects, that is the database objects which are stored inside the schema. Okay, so if I expand this catalog, try to understand. If I expand this catalog, we have different schemas here. Okay, we have different schemas. Okay, the schema can be what? A user defined schema, or it can be a system defined schema. What you can understand here is, if you take our abap context also, there are some predefined packages provided by what? SAP. Similarly, we can create our own package. No? So if you take the development process of this abap, what you will do in the real time in the projects, all the objects that we develop, we'll store it inside a package, inside a transportable package, so that I can transport it from what? One environment to what? Another environment. Development client to quality client to what? Production client. Similarly here, we have something called as schema. What is this schema? A schema is a logical container of what? Database objects. Means what we need to do is, these are all the different schemas, these are all user defined. There are some system defined schemas also, which starts with what? Sys, which starts with sys. You can see here, we have many system defined schemas. Initially, we are not going to touch this system defined schemas. When we go to stored procedures concept, at that time we'll be seeing some of the standard schemas here. So let us not bother about the schema. Initially, what you have to do, I want to design the HANA database. I want to create the database objects. Where do we store these database objects? Inside a schema. Inside a schema. You can visualize schema as what? You can visualize the schema like a package. What is a package? A package is a collection of what? Objects. Similarly, a schema is also what? It's a container of what? Database objects. Database objects. Okay. So every user can have its own schema. So I logged into which schema here? Sorry, I logged into which user? HANA user. Na? So on behalf of the logged in user, a default schema will be available. So this is my username. What is the username? HANA. So you'll have a default schema with the name same as that of username. So if I expand this, yeah, you can see I'm having one schema by name what? HANA. Okay, so this HANA is a schema related to which user? HANA user. HANA user. Similarly, in the real time also, for every user, you will have what one default schema with the same name as that of what username. Here also we have what hana. Okay, so more about the schemas, how to transport the objects from the schema, how to move the objects from one schema to another schema, we'll see during the development process. So as of now, our focus is only on what? Creating the database objects. Where exactly these database objects are stored inside a schema. Okay, so they're all the what custom schema someone might have created. Now what I want is, let me create one table. So one of the database object is what? Table. So we know what is the meaning of a table. A table is a collection of what? Rows and what? Columns. A table is a collection of rows and columns. So when you are creating any database objects, the database objects must be qualified. The database objects must be qualified with the schema name. Qualified means prefix. The database objects must be prefixed by what? Schema name. So what I'll do now is, I'll try to create a simple table. Okay, I'll try to create a simple table. One of the important feature of hana database is what? hana database supports both what? Row store and what? Column store tables. At this stage, again, we have not yet discussed what is row store table and what column store table. So what I'll do is, I'll discuss some part of this native hana development. Means we'll be seeing in the next 3-4 days, we'll be seeing how to create the some of the database objects. So during that, as and when required, we'll see what is the difference between row store table and column store table. I repeat once again, so far in whatever the projects we have worked, we are using what? Non-hana database. So this non-hana database supports what? Row store feature. But whereas hana database supports both row store and what? Column store. So when you are creating the table, the developer has to decide whether we need to create row store table or what? Column store table. On what basis we are going to decide that? That we can understand only if you know the differences. For the time being, we'll focus only on what? How to create the table. How do you create the table in normal abap? In SC11, we'll provide the table name and we'll click on the create button and we'll provide the columns and we'll provide some what? Settings like technical settings, data class and size category, enhancement category, okay, delivery class. Will specify one or more primary key fields. We are going to configure some settings, but whereas here I want to create a table. So as of now, I have not created any schema. Remember, generally what we have to do before we start designing the hana database? I repeat, before we start designing the hana database, we need to create your own schema. And what are the database objects that we create? It has those objects you have to store inside your own schema. But as of now, I don't know how to create the schema. But what we understood is, on behalf of every logged in user, a default schema will be available with the same name. So here under the catalog, what are we? If I expand this, we are seeing all these things. These are called about schemas. It can be user defined schema, or it can be what? System defined schema. System defined schema starts with what? This sys underscore sys. Okay. Similarly, we have something called as catalog. Again, sorry, not catalog, content. Okay. So if I expand this content, whatever I am able to see here, they are nothing but called as packages. Just like we create package in what? SC80 to store all your objects. Here also, to store all your design time objects, we can create the package. For next 1 week or 10 days, we are not going to touch this content. Forget about that. When we come to CDS views, AMDP, stored procedures, at that time we'll focus on content. Initially, I'll be using only catalog. Catalog contains what? User defined schema and what? System defined schema. Schema is like a what? Container of what? Database objects. So my agenda is what? I want to create a table. So this table, sorry, I missed this point. So as I told you, as part of this native hana development, we are going to create different types of database objects now. So there are some database objects which we can create both by using SQL statement as well as by using what? UI, user interface. Okay, means user interface means like a wizard kind of thing. but there are some database objects which we can create only through what? SQL console. I repeat once again, these are the different database objects that we are going to create. There are some database objects which we can create both by using what? UI, I mean to say user interface, that is through wizard, or through what? Manual SQL statement. But there are some database objects which can be created only through what? SQL statement. So for the timing, what I'll do is I'll try to create the table using what? SQL statement. So in order to create the SQL, in order to use the SQL statements, I require what? SQL console. How do we open the SQL console? See here. This is my catalog folder. This is my catalog. You can see we have the SQL here. Open SQL console for the selected system. I can choose this catalog. I can click on this open SQL console for selected system. Okay. Or I can right click on the catalog folder. I can say what? Open SQL console. I can do either of them. I'll try to open the SQL console. Good. So one observation here, see, whenever I open the SQL console, it has opened in the right hand side. It has opened in the right hand side. I can see here, this SQL console is opened on behalf of which user here? hana user. hana user. So on behalf of the hana user, you'll have one schema. Na? So it has opened on behalf of which schema? hana schema. Suppose now we have something called as we have something called as ABCD, some schema name. What I'll do, I'll select the system, right click on this, and also open SQL console. So when I open this, good, you can see now. Okay, this is what? SQL console. This is also SQL console, but you can see what is the current schema here? ABCD. But whereas here you can see this schema, this SQL console is open on behalf of which user? Login user. What is the schema related to that one? hana schema. So here, but whereas here you can see this SQL console is open on behalf of which schema? ABCD. So for the timing, I'll just close once again. I'll try to open the SQL console. Initially, I'll right click on the catalog. I'll say open SQL console. Okay, it has opened the SQL console. Yeah, it has opened the SQL console. So what is my agenda here? I want to create a table. So how do you create a table? I'll use a statement called as create table. Now this is important. These database objects, whatever I listed, okay, in order to create these database objects, we use what? SQL. We use what? SQL statements. Okay. So these SQL statements I can classify into different types like DDL statements, data definition language, okay, DRL, data retrieval language, DML, data manipulation language, DCL, data control language, TCL, transaction control language. So what I can say is this SQL, what is this SQL basically? It's a standard language used for communicating with what? Databases. Understood? SQL is a standard language used for what? Communicating with what? Databases. So just like in our abap context, from your abap reports, how do you communicate with the database? We can use two types of SQL statements, open SQL and what? Native SQL. Here also, here I am directly connecting to what? hana database. So we use SQL for communicating with the hana database. Okay. So this SQL I can classify into what? Different sub language, like what? DDL, data definition language, DRL, data retrieval language, DML, data manipulation language. What else? DCL, data control language. What else? TCL, transaction control language. So if you take DDL, as part of this DDL, we have different statements: create, alter, drop. All this comes under what? DDL. If I take DRL, data retrieval language, as the name itself suggests, it is used for reading. So that select comes under a DRL. Then DML, insert, update, delete. Insert, update, delete comes under what? DML. DCL, data control language. This is again mainly used by administrator, like grant and revoke. Okay, for providing the permission we use grant. For removing the permission we use what? Revoke. TCL, transaction control language. We have something called as commit and what? Rollback. Okay. So like this, what I mean to say, SQL can be classified into what? Different language. So we are going to discuss what? All these particular statements. As of now, I want to create the table. So what is the DDL statement I need to use? Create. For creating any database objects, for creating the database table, view, synonym, sequence, index, we use a DDL statement called as what? Create. For creating any data definition, we use what? Create statement. So I'll say create table. Try to understand. Create table. I'll give the table name as something. mm, uh, I'll give the table name as something. Uh, then soft test. Some table name. Forget about that. Yeah, one important point here. You can see I'm enclosing my object name inside what? Double quote. So it is only a recommendation. It is not mandatory. The recommendation is all the database objects should be enclosed in what? Double quotes. It's only a recommendation. So create table so and so. I'll give the column. So how do you give? I'll open this parenthesis. I can do it in single line only, but just to increase the readability, I'm providing in the next line. So I'm opening the parenthesis. I have to give us some column names. Again, the recommendation is column names also better be enclosed in what? Double quote. So I'll give something what? EMP ID. Yeah, EMP ID, let me give it as what? Integer. Let me give it as integer. Done. Then I'll give another column, ename. Okay, just like we'll say data EMP ID type I. Here it is what? Integer. I want to declare a string variable. So I'll say ename. We have one data type called as varchar. You can assume this varchar similar to what? String data type, character data type. Varchar of something 20. Close the parenthesis. That's all. Okay, so what I did in the SQL console is we are trying to create a database table by using what? Create statement. Now, when I'm creating the table, I have not mentioned whether it is row store table or what? Column store table. I repeat, in my HANA database, the developer has got the choice of creating both either row store or what? Column store table. But while creating this table, I have not mentioned the category of the table, whether it is row store or what? Column store. Okay, let's see what happens. So how do we execute this statement? In the SQL console, remember, in the SQL console, I can have any number of what? Statements. I can have any number of statements. Okay. If I click on this execute button, you can see right hand side we have F8. If I click on this execute button, it will try to execute all the statements in my SQL console. My SQL console might contain 1,000 statements. It will try to execute what? All the 1,000 statements. That is why if you want to execute a particular statement, better we select that block. Select that. Am I clear? Okay, so select that particular statement which you want to execute and then press what? F8. If you don't select, what it will do, the default behavior is it will try to execute all the statements. So to avoid that headache, I'm just selecting the statement which I want to execute. I'll click on what? Execute button. Let's see what happens. Let me increase the width here. Yeah, I'll try to execute. Good. What happened? You can see the message on the bottom. Create table so and so is what? Successfully executed in so and so time. Okay, so the table is created. So now when I'm creating this table, again I have not specified in which schema the table has to be created. I have not mentioned any schema name, but I told that on behalf of the logged in user, a default schema will be available with the same name. Na? So if I expand this HANA here, try to understand. HANA is a default schema for this user. If I expand this, yeah, you can see what is the table name? Gensoft test. Na? Now, if I expand this schema, you are able to see some what? Objects. These are all called as what? Database objects. Database objects, column views, EPM models, function indexes. I am concerned with the tables. Let me expand these tables. If I expand, it is showing you many tables. One of the table just now we created what? Gensoft test. One of the table we created what? Gensoft test. Okay. Let me try to open the definition of this. How do you open? Right click on this. Say what? Open definition. Am I clear? Right click on this table and say open definition. So when I say open definition, done. You can see here, it has created this table. In which schema it is created? HANA. So what you have to understand? Yes, what you have to understand, this SQL console is opened on behalf of the logged in user. Na? What is the schema associated with the logged in user? HANA. So what are the objects you create in that SQL console will be created for that particular schema only. That's why you can see here it is created in the schema what HANA. For the timing, you understand schema is like a package folder. A package, a collection of what objects. Similarly, a schema is a collection of what objects, database objects. Now I can see here what is the type of table it has mentioned here. The type of table it has mentioned as what? Column store. The type of table it has mentioned as what? Column store. So when I create the table here, without specifying the what type of the table, it has created what? Column store table. Okay, done. Now let me try to create row store table. Just try to understand. Create table. I'll give the table name as something row table. What is the keyword I'm using? Create row table. Create row table. Sorry, boss. 1 second. What is the table name I gave? Gens of test only. Gens of table. What is the type of table here? Column store. Done. The type of table is column store. Done. Create row table so and so. Yeah, I'll try to create this. Let's see what happens. What is the table name I'm giving? Gens of test. Here also is what gens of test. So I'll try to execute. If I don't select this, if I directly click on this F8 button, what happens? It will try to execute all the statements, but I don't want to execute. I want to execute a particular statement. I'm selecting this, click on this F8 button, execute button. Done. What happened here? I got an error here. Create row table so and so cannot use duplicate table name. So what happened here? Already there is an object, there is a table existing with the same name. That's why it is giving an error. I'll give it as gens of test one. Done. Let me execute now. It might have created, yes, create row table. Gens of test one table is created. Is it showing here? It is not showing. Probably I need to refresh. Understood? This is my schema HANA. This is the table. It is not showing. Right click on the tables and say somewhere what? Refresh. F5. When I click on this refresh, done. It has shown the table. Let me try to open the table definition. Right click on this. What is this? Open what? Definition. Done. What happened? It has created the table and you can see the data type here. Sorry, the type of the table. Row store is a table. Row store is the table. Hope it's clear. So what you understood so far is what are the table I am trying to create or what are the database object I am trying to create. Since I have not specified any schema name, it is getting created under what? The default schema available for that particular user. Available for that particular user. So what I'll do now, I want to create my own schema. I don't want the schema with this name. So I want to create my own schema. So what I'll do, this, okay, I can close these things. Yeah, I want to create my own schema. Okay, how do you create? We use a statement, create schema. 1 second, please. Okay, so I'll give a schema name as create schema. Let me give the name as something Gensoft SQL. Gensoft SQL. Okay, create schema, Gensoft schema SQL. Done. That's all. Let me check whether I can create the schema or not. I can create provided I'm having the permission. Provided the what is the user here? HANA user. No? This HANA user should have the permission to create the schema. Who is going to set those permission? By the administrator. Okay, so we need not worry about that permission. I'll just select this. I'll say F8. What happened? The schema might have created. What is the name? Gensoft SQL. I cannot see it here. I need to refresh. Right click on the catalog. Right click on the catalog. I'll say refresh. Good. What happened? The schema got created. Gensoft SQL schema got created. Okay. Now what I'll do? Let me. Okay. As of now, if you see, if I expand my schema, if I expand the tables, observe here. If I expand the tables, I don't have any tables in my schema. My table section is blank. Let me create a table quickly. So I'll say, okay, here I'll say create table, I'll suffix the table name. I'll qualify the table name with my schema name. Create table. What is this? Gens of SQL. Dot. You can observe the naming convention. Even the schema name also I'm enclosing in double quotes. Not compulsory, but as a practice, it is recommended to enclose that object name. Schema is also an object name inside what double quotes. I'll give the table name as something what emp1. Done. I'll try to create some columns. Emp number I'll say. Then I'll try to give it as int. Earlier I gave integer. Now I'm trying to give only int. Let's see will accept or not. Int. Then what? Ename. Then I'll say something varchar of what 20. You can assume this varchar is similar to what string. Okay, varchar of 20. That's all. Okay. Let me try to execute this statement. F8. What happened? The table got created. So let me try to refresh here. Done. It is created. What is this? EMP1. Let me try to open the definition. How do you open? Right click on this, open definition. Okay, good. It has created the table. Now, one important point here. What is the table name? Again, what is the table type here? By default, it is created as what? Column store. By default here, it has created as what? Column store. Done. Now, let me try to, okay, the table got created. The column table got created. Okay. Can I insert the, okay, can I see the data in this table? How do you check it? Right click on the table. Understood? Right click on the table. There is something called as what? Open content, or I can say open data preview. If I open this, I can see as of now my table is blank. There are no rows available. Okay, there are no rows available. This is my table definition, table structure, and this is my SQL console. So quickly, I want to insert some data into this particular table. How do we insert here? Just I'm trying to show you the environment related to SQL console. Okay, so what is that I have to use? I have to use one statement called as, one second. Yeah. So as part of DDL, I used what create. I used create so far for creating what table as well as what schema. Now I want to insert the data into the table. So here you can see we can use what insert statement. This comes under what DML, data manipulation language. How do you create insert into? Insert into what is the table name? EMP1. It is part of which schema? Gens of SQL. Insert into gens of SQL dot what is this? EMP1. Okay, try to understand values. How many columns are there in my table? 2 columns, employee number and what? Employee name. So I'll say employee number as something 1, employee name I'll give it as something Raju. You can see here in abap also I believe we enclose the characters in single quotes. Here also we need to enclose it in what? Single quotes. 1 comma Raju. Done. Okay. I'll try to insert some data. I'll say F8. Okay, I want to execute all these 3 statements at a time. That's why I'm selecting the block of statements. Okay, I'll say F8. What happened? It might have got executed. Now let me refresh. Here you can see already the instance is open. And somewhere you'll have refresh button here. Refresh. I'll just click on this. How many rows are there? 3 rows are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Let me insert one more record. I'll try to insert one more record. Insert into Gensoft SQL. Now this time what I want is, okay, I'll do one thing. I'll give employee number as 4. I'll not give this. My table definition is having how many columns? 2 columns. Employee number and what? Employee name. While inserting the data, I'm providing the data only for 1 column. Okay, let's see what happens. When I try to execute, when I say F8, what happened? I got an error here. What is that? Insert into so and so. Not enough values. So it is giving me what? Error. So what is my agenda here? I want to maintain the data only for what? Employee number. So how do we do it? I'll send all these things. Don't take anything. Everything what I am typing here, I'll send it through email with a detailed note, so don't take anything. Insert into so and so. My requirement is what? I want to enter the data only for employee number. So in the brackets, what is that column name? EMP number. So I'll just say what? EMP number. I need not give double quotes. I can directly give like this. Employee number, value is 4. So let's see will accept or not. If it, what happened? It got inserted. So if I refresh, done. Okay, the insert statement got executed, successfully inserted. Okay, let me create one more table. Just try to understand this. I'll try to create one more table. Control C. Create table. I'll give it as EMP2. I'll give it as EMP2. The change I'll do is this employee number, while creating this employee number column, I'll give a constraint called as not null constraint. So we have a concept called as constraints. We have different types of constraints: not null constraint, primary key constraint, foreign key constraint, check constraint, unique constraint. Like this, we have different types of what constraints. So what I'm trying to do, so if you see the earlier table, EMP1, this earlier table I created. Okay, here you can see for this employee number and employee name, you can see both these columns are blank. Key column is blank, not null column is blank. Key column is blank, not null column is blank. Now I'm trying to create a new table EMP2. As part of the EMP number, I'm specifying what not null. Let's see what happens. I'll say fit. The table got created. Let me open the definition. First refresh. Yes, we have EMP2. EMP2. Okay. So if I right click and I'll say open definition. Yeah, for this EMP2 also it is created by default as what? Column store. By default it's created as column store. It has got 2 columns, but you can observe the change. For employee number, not null column is set to X. Na? So what is the meaning? We are having what? Not null constraint for this EMP number. Let us understand what is the meaning of not null. Try to understand. I'll insert some data first. Insert into so and so. What is the table name? EMP2, EMP2, EMP2. Okay, sorry, EMP2. So in the second table also, I'm trying to create those 3 records. I'll say fit. It might have created. Let me check the data in this EMP2. Right click on this. I'll say what? Open data preview. Yes, we have 3 columns in the EMP2 table also. We have 3 columns in the EMP2 tables. We have 1, 2, 3 done. Now what I'll do is, what is that EMP ID? Not null. Na? Now I'll say insert into so and so. Employee number I'll give it as 2. Okay, I'll give employee name as something Pawan. Okay, insert into table name. So and so value is what? 2 comma what? Pawan. 2 comma Pawan. 2 is already there in the table. Let me try to execute. I'll say fit. Insert is successfully executed. Let me go and refresh. I'll refresh here. What happened? 2 pawn got created. Means what I'm trying to show is I'm able to enter. I'm able to enter what? I'm able to enter the duplicate values for what? Employee number. Done. Now I'll do one thing. Earlier in the earlier table, I entered the data only for employee number. Now in this table, I'll try to enter the data only for employee name. I'll try to enter the data for employee name values. Yeah, I'll give the value as something what? Srinivas. So what I'm trying to do, I'm not maintaining the value. I'm trying to insert null value for what? Employee number. I'm maintaining the value only for what? Employee name. Let's see what happens. Earlier, when I enter the data only for employee number, it is accepting. Now I'm trying to maintain the data only for employee name. So when I execute, when I say fit, what happened? I got an error. Insert into so and so cannot insert null or update to what? Null. Cannot insert null or update to null. So what is the meaning? If a not null constraint is imposed on a column, if a not null constraint is imposed on a column, it cannot contain what? Null values. Means it cannot contain what? Blank values. It can contain duplicate values. So what is the difference between Already we know primary key and abap. What is the difference between primary key and this not null? Primary key cannot have duplicate values, cannot have null values. Whereas not null constraint can contain duplicate values but cannot contain what? Null values. Understood? So this is the way to create the table by using what? A SQL statement. Okay. So any question so far, please ask me.
The option to check the syntax error
Ashutosh,
before
Ashutosh,
executing?
your voice is very low. Can you please be louder?
Yeah. Do we have any option to check the syntax before executing?
Yeah, yeah. In the coming sessions, I'll show you how to what check the syntaxes. You'll have the documentation just like in our abap. If you press F1, you'll get the online help. Na? Here also, you'll have a documentation available in this HANA Studio itself. In that, I can check the syntaxes. Yes, obviously, we'll have.
No, no.
I'll.
I am asking about syntax error. Like in above, we
No, no,
check
no.
the
Control
syntax
F2.
is,
You are saying Control F2, na?
yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that. No. Directly, we have to
Okay.
execute. At the time of execution only, if the syntax is wrong, it will give you the error.
Okay.
Any other doubts, others? Right. I'll do one small change. Yeah, Rambabu, you're asking anything?
Yes, yes, sir. Just I have a
Yeah.
small doubt. So, how do we differentiate between Z tables and standard tables over here? So it seems all standard tables, right? Normal ABAP EMP means it won't accept. So we need to put a G or Y. So something is there any specification over here?
No, here it's not compulsory that I have to start with Z because the simple reason is there in our ABAP environment, we are not creating the object directly by connecting to database. We are doing it through application server, through SC11. Okay.
Yes.
Compulsorily, all the repository objects, dictionary objects, you must prefix with what? Z. Otherwise, it will ask you for something called as what? Access key. Okay, when you're not starting with Z or Y, it will ask you for what? Access key. But whereas here, how do we differentiate means we don't have exactly the differentiation, but anyhow we are creating these objects in our own schema, na? In our own schema. So it is a custom schema. So obviously whatever we create in the custom schema will be what? Custom objects. If you take the standard schemas, for example, one second. I'm working on CP above one now. One second.
But even though we are not mentioning this is for custom schema or this is for standard schema, right? So generally, we
I'm
are giving.
mentioning here I'm prefixing the object name with the schema name. Na? So it's a custom schema only.
But the standard schema also look like, right?
Yeah, same. That's what I'm saying. If you open the standard schemas, suppose I'm having something called a syspic. Okay. In the syspic, if I open the tables, okay, so you can see here we have one table called as what? VBA. VBA. Understood? So this is a standard table. Means I cannot differentiate here. But understanding is all the standard tables are available in the standard schemas. Actually, that is not the sentence. Here I need to look for 1 second, please. 1 second. 1 second. I need to check the configured schema. Then only I can tell you. Just hold on.
Or in real time, do we need to maintain any Z table? I mean Z.
No. Not required.
Okay.
Not required. I want to show something here. I'll use some T code called DBA copy. Again, this is not relevant for us. This is administrator T code. CPI part. Okay, good. Yeah, you can see here, this is my actually what GUI. I'll choose system status. What is the schema here? SAP ABAP 1. I'll do one thing. Let me go to SC11. Suppose I want to check for VBAK table. If I open this, I'm able to see what VBAK table. I'll try to open VBAP. I'm able to see that. I'll open KN1. Okay, these are all the standard tables. Now, I want to access these tables in my HANA database also. I want to see them. So what I'll do, let me just go to HANA Studio. What I identified from this GUI is what is the configured schema. I understood that the configured schema is what? SAP ABAP 1. The configured schema is SAP ABAP. So with that knowledge, in my HANA Studio, where is that SAP ABAP 1 schema? Yeah, you can see. In the catalog, we have what SAP ABAP 1. If I expand this, we go to tables. 1 second. Let me right click on the table. I'm right clicking on the table. I'll remove these filters. Yeah, you can see now. In the SAP ABAP 1 schema, you can see these are all the standard tables which I can access through SC11. So I want what VBAK table. Yeah, you can see I'm having got VBAK table. I can right click on this, also open definition. It will open all this column. So what I mean to say is, since we are directly doing the development in the database itself, the point here is we are doing the development directly in the database. So first of all, access should be there to connect to database. So if you are a valid user only, the access will be given. So I can directly go and create the objects. But if you want to check what are my standard table means, first I need to connect to my GUI. From this I understood that the schema configured with the application service what SAP ABAP 1. So with that knowledge, in my catalog folder under SAP ABAP 1, I went through the tables. But here I cannot tell whether it is a custom table or standard table. Remember one point. We cannot differentiate because directly we are in the database.
Okay.
It's not possible. Suppose here, if I open this SC11, right
Here we can.
Yeah, here, suppose I'll say EMP test 1 I created, EMP 2 I created, EMP 3 I'll give. Okay, when I click on create, here I'm here I'm having the permission. I'm having the permission, that's why it is allowing me. But generally in the real time, what happens? Since you are not starting with what? Z or Y, it will ask you for what? Access key. So it will restrict. But whereas here in the HANA Studio, we are directly connecting to what? HANA database. So you cannot differentiate between the standard objects and what? Custom objects, custom tables.
Okay.
Yeah, Sandeep, whichever table you are creating is 11. Okay, good point. Right. So what Sandeep has asked is, just observe here. I created some tables. What are the tables I created? EMP I created, gens of test I created, EMP1 I created, and EMP2 I created. I'm able to see the table definition in my HANA Studio. Now I'll go to my logon pack. Okay, so I created EMP1 and EMP2 now. So let me just cancel this. I'll give EMP1. Okay, I'll say display. What is happening here? EMP1 does not exist. Why? Because what is the configured schema here? SAP ABAP 1. I have not created that in that one. That's why I'm unable to see that. I'm unable to see that. I created that inside what? Some other schema. What is that schema name I created? Gens of SQL. This is not the configured schema. That's why I cannot see it. So my answer is it will not be replicated. If you create that in the configured schema only, it will be replicated. Any other doubts, others?
Sridhar, one question. This is Pawan here.
Yeah, tell me.
So you open this SQL console. So this SQL console code, whatever is written, is also stored somewhere in this catalog. If we have to open it again. After we
means
close,
my understanding is, okay, you have written some statements here. You have written some
right.
statements and you have closed it now. If you reopen, will you get back these statements? That is what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
No, it will be lost. That's why
It will
when
be
you're trying
lost.
to close, it will ask you whether you want to save it. If you say yes, I can save it as .sql file. I can save it as .sql file so that when I open a new instance of SQL console, I can copy that statements from there. But here it will be destroyed. The moment you close the SQL console, all the statements will be destroyed because it is local to that session.
Okay, so if we have to change, suppose you have written, you have created a table, and if we want to add a new column into the existing
Yeah,
table,
I understand. I understand. So, see, it's not compulsory that whatever the table we create, you will use the same table structure throughout. At any point of time, we may have the requirement to add a new column or to drop an existing column or to modify the data type of the column or to impose a constraint on that existing column. For those things, we need to understand alter statement. Somewhere I go alter na. So by using this alter statement, I can add new columns at later point of time. Okay, by using this drop statement, I can drop an existing column. By using this alter statement, I can impose a new constraint. So you need not worry about this. Even if you close this particular SQL console, not an issue. At any point of time, any table definition I can modify by using what alter statement.
okay,
Right?
thank you. Right.
That is the purpose of these statements. Alter is used for what? Altering the definition of the database objects, not only table. Going forward, we'll create something, view, sequence, finance. At any point of time, we can change the definitions by using what? Alter. If you want to delete them completely, then we'll go for drop. We'll see all these things in the next 1 week to 10 days. We'll see each and every statement with examples.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So what we understood so far is the purpose of not null constraint. What is this not null constraint? It can accept duplicate values. It can hold the duplicate values, but it cannot hold the null values. Null values in the sense blank values. Primary key is different from not null. Primary key is a combination of not null and unique. Means primary key cannot accept null values, cannot accept duplicate values. Anyhow, next 2-3 days we'll be seeing all those constraints: primary key constraint, unique constraint, foreign key constraint. It is almost the conceptually it is same as our normal abap foreign key, all those things. And one more point, here I created the table. While creating the table, try to understand, while creating the table, I have not mentioned what is the type of the table. So by default it is created as what? Row store table. Row store table. Sorry, by default it is created as what? Column store table. So at any point of time, we can change the type of the table. Means I can convert the row table to column table. I can convert the column table to a row table. Again, for that, we use a statement called as what? Alter. We'll be seeing all those things. Okay. When we have to create the row table and when you have to go for columns to table, that we'll understand after 3-4 sessions. Okay. So till that time, forget about the difference between row store table and column. So it is a theoretical concept. That theoretical concept I'll explain only after discussing some statements, so that you'll have a better understanding of that. So any questions for today, please ask me.
One more question, sir.
Yeah, please.
The moment these tables are created, I mean, now say in the real time we have different servers like development, quality, and production, different databases. So hope there will be a mechanism to move these objects across. Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. 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 In the course, during the course only, we'll be seeing a concept called as HTC, HANA Transport Container, and there is something called a delivery unit. So in that, we'll be seeing how to transport the HANA objects from one system to another system. Yes, possible.
Okay,
Okay.
fine.
So for the time being, we use something this export and import. Export and
Okay.
import. For doing this, there in our abap context, we use transport organizer SC09, SC10. Here we use this export and import along with what HTC and what delivery unit.
It is.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Sandeep, we can copy the tables from one schema to another schema. Yes, we can. How to do? Again, we need to wait for a few days. Everything is possible. Everything is possible. One object is available in one schema. To other schema also, I want to replicate the same object. Yes, we can do. We can create an object based on existing object. We can move the objects from one schema to another schema. When you move the object, it will ask you whether you want with data or without data. Everything we can control. So this native HANA development, I can say, to complete all these things, this itself will take around 15 to 18 hours. 15 to 18 hours. So we need to wait to understand all these things clearly. We need to wait for at least 3 weeks or so. Okay. Once we are done with all these things, we will see how to use them. As of now, we are in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will create them independently. But how exactly we use them means that will come when we start discussing the reporting thing like ADBC, CDS views, AMDPs, HANA modeling. In all those objects, we will be using these database objects. But in order to use them, first of all, the database should be ready. That's the reason we are designing the database. Designing the database is nothing but creating and managing these objects. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, I'll wind up for today. We'll continue tomorrow. I'll share that vendor details today. So if you are interested, you can talk to that person and take their server and rental system. Okay, they'll charge some 800 to 1200 per month. I think it is around 1000 to 1200, but just check with them and they'll keep on changing that. Okay, I'll share that vendor details with everyone. You can directly contact them through email or through phone. If they ask for any reference, you refer my name, Sridhar from Gensoft is here. Okay, Chal. I'll wind up then. We'll continue tomorrow. I'll share this complete thing with detailed notes. You can practice as it is. Okay, Chal.
This conference is no longer being recorded.